I watched Claire's father write a check for £50,000 and slide it across his mahogany desk toward me like I was something he could simply purchase and remove. His office smelled like old money and leather, and he looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on expensive carpet. "This is more than you'll make in 2 years at that charity of yours," he said, his voice calm and certain. "Take it. Disappear. Let my daughter marry someone appropriate." I stared at that check, at all those zeros, and felt my hands shake. Not from temptation, but from the weight of knowing that Claire was 3 months pregnant and hadn't told him yet. I didn't take the money. I walked out. And 6 weeks later, when Richard Ashford's entire investment portfolio collapsed and his name became synonymous with scandal, when he lost everything while I was asked to lead the largest humanitarian project. In East Africa, I understood something he never would. Worth isn't measured in what you own. It's measured in what you build when you have nothing. My name is Daniel Okoye, and I grew up in Peckham, South London, in a council flat with my mother and 2 younger sisters. My father died when I was 11, heart attack on a construction site, no insurance, no savings. Just debt and a family that had to figure out how to survive on my mother's wages from cleaning offices at night. I learned early that faith wasn't about prosperity gospel or Sunday suits. It was about my mother praying over a nearly empty fridge and somehow making meals stretch for days. It was about believing there was purpose in the struggle, even when the struggle was all we had. I met Claire Ashford at a volunteer event in Shoreditch when I was 26. I was coordinating a winter shelter program for homeless families through a Christian charity called Restore Hope. She'd come with friends from her church, one of those wealthy evangelical congregations in Kensington, where the building looked like a concert venue and everyone drove Range Rovers to Sunday service. Claire was different, though. She didn't just show up for photos. She stayed late, helped clean, asked real questions, and came back the next week without her friends. Started talking. Then we started meeting for coffee. Then we fell in love in the quiet, inevitable way that happens when you find someone who sees the world the same way you do, even if you come from completely different worlds. Claire was 24, a graduate, from King's College with a degree in international development that her father had paid for but never expected her to use. Richard Ashford was a private equity investor, the kind of man who owned things, buildings, companies, influence. He was also deeply religious in the transactional way wealthy people sometimes are. He tithed generously, sat on church boards, and believed God's blessing was visible in his bank account. Faith, to him, was evidence of divine favor, and poverty was evidence of divine judgment or poor decision-making. For the first 8 months, Claire didn't tell her family about me, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew what would happen. When she finally did, during Sunday lunch at their home in Hampstead, her father's response was immediate and absolute. "This is a phase," he'd said, cutting his roast beef with surgical precision. "You'll grow out of it." But Claire didn't grow out of it. And 6 months later, when she told her father she was serious about me, he invited me to his office for what he called a conversation between men. Richard Ashford's office was in Canary Wharf, all glass and steel and views of the Thames that reminded you exactly how high above the city he sat. He didn't stand when I entered. He gestured to the chair across from his desk like he was granting me an audience. "I've looked into you," he said without preamble. "Daniel Okoye, 27, project coordinator for Restore Hope. Annual salary of £28,000, renting a flat in Lewisham, sending money home to your mother every month." He said it like he was reading a crime report. "You're a good person, I'm sure, sincere, hard-working. But you are not a match for my daughter." I didn't respond immediately. I'd expected this, but hearing it said so plainly still landed like a punch. "Claire has opportunities," he continued. "She could work in her uncle's firm. She could marry someone with a future, someone who could provide stability, security, a proper life. Instead, she's talking about moving to Lewisham and volunteering in refugee centers. He leaned forward. "Do you understand what you're asking her to give up?" "I'm not asking her to give up anything," I said quietly. "I'm asking her to build something different." "On what foundation?" His voice sharpened. "Faith and good intentions? That's not a foundation, Daniel. That's naivety. You can't raise a family on charity work and prayer." That's when he wrote the check. £50,000. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. He slid it across the desk and waited, watching my face for the moment I'd break, the moment I'd prove I was exactly what he thought I was, someone who could be bought. "This is for walking away," he said, cleanly, quietly. "You tell Claire it's not working. You disappear. You use this money however you want. Pay off your mother's debts. Start something new. I don't care. But you leave my daughter alone." I looked at that check for a long time. I thought about my mother's arthritis, about the medical bills she never mentioned, about my sister's university fees. I thought about how easy it would be to take it and how much harder everything would be if I didn't. Then I thought about Claire. About the way she looked at me when I talked about the families we'd helped resettle. About how she'd told me 3 days earlier that she was pregnant and terrified and didn't know how to tell her father yet. I stood up and left the check on his desk. "I love your daughter," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere." His expression didn't change. "Then you're a fool," he said, "and you'll destroy her life." I walked out and took the tube back to Lewisham, feeling like I'd just made either the best or worst decision of my life. Claire told her father about the pregnancy 2 weeks later. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just looked at her across the same desk where he'd tried to pay me off and said, "You're no longer my daughter." He meant it. He cut her off financially. He told her family not to contact her. He removed her from his will and made sure she knew it. Claire's mother called once, crying, begging her to fix this, but she didn't fight Richard. No one in that. Family fought Richard. Claire moved into my tiny Lewisham flat with 2 suitcases and a determination that broke my heart. She'd grown up with everything, and now she was living in a place where the heating barely worked, and the nearest grocery store was a 20-minute walk. She got a job teaching English to asylum seekers for barely minimum wage. She learned to cook cheap meals. She never complained, but I saw her cry when she thought I wasn't looking. I wanted to give her everything and had nothing to give. I picked up extra shifts. I applied for better positions. I prayed more desperately than I ever had, asking God why loving someone right felt like punishment. Then, 6 weeks after Claire's father disowned her, everything shifted. Richard Ashford's investment firm had been involved in a development deal in Southeast Asia. Something he'd talked about at that Sunday lunch months earlier, something that was supposed to triple his portfolio. But the deal collapsed, spectacularly. The partner company was investigated for fraud. Richard's firm was named in the scandal. Assets were frozen. Investors sued. Within a month, Richard Ashford went from wealthy to financially ruined, his name attached to a disaster he hadn't seen coming. It was all over the financial news. Claire saw it first, her face pale as she read the articles on her phone. Her father had lost nearly everything. The same week, I received a call from the director of Restore Hope. An international development coalition had been following our work with refugee families. They were launching a 5-year humanitarian project in Kenya and Uganda. Clean water infrastructure, education programs, community health initiatives. They wanted someone to lead it, someone with field experience, cultural sensitivity, and faith-driven commitment. They wanted me. The salary was modest by Western standards, but triple what I was making. The project had funding from multiple governments and NGOs. It was the kind of opportunity people spent careers working toward, and it had come to me at 27. Claire and I sat in our small flat that night, her hand on her growing belly, both of us trying to process what had happened. Her father, who'd measured worth in wealth, had lost his, and I, who he'd dismissed as worthless, had been chosen for something that mattered more than any investment portfolio. We moved to Nairobi 4 months after our daughter Grace was born. Claire's father never met her. He sent no gifts, no calls, no acknowledgement. Claire's mother reached out once through a cousin asking for photos, but Richard had forbidden contact, and she wouldn't defy him. The family that had everything chose pride over their own granddaughter. The project in East Africa grew beyond what anyone expected. Over 3 years, we helped build 17 clean water systems serving over 40,000 people. We established 3 schools. We trained local health workers. The work was hard, sometimes heartbreaking, but it was real. It mattered. And Claire, who her father thought would wilt without luxury, became one of the most effective community organizers I'd ever seen. She spoke Swahili within a year. She built relationships with local leaders. She was extraordinary. We heard about Richard occasionally through mutual church connections. He'd rebuilt some of his finances but never recovered his former status. He'd become bitter, isolated. His church had quietly distanced themselves when the scandal hit. The man who'd believed God's favor was measured in wealth discovered that wealth was the only favor he'd ever really had. Claire wrote him one letter, 3 years after we'd left London. She included photos of Grace, updates on our work, an invitation to reconcile. He never responded. Now, 5 years later, we're back in London coordinating the UK branch of the Humanitarian Coalition. We live in a modest house in Brixton. Grace is 6 and asks questions about her grandfather she's never met. Claire tells her the truth, that sometimes people can't see past their own definitions of worth, and it costs them everything that actually matters. We still attend church, though not the wealthy ones. We go to a small congregation in Peckham, near where I grew up, where faith looks less like prosperity and more like persistence, where people understand that being chosen by God rarely looks like being chosen by the world. Worth isn't something you can measure in bank statements or social status. Richard Ashford couldn't see past what I didn't have, and it blinded him to what I was building. He thought poverty disqualified me, but poverty had taught me everything that mattered: resilience, faith, the difference between value and cost. Being chosen doesn't always look impressive at first. Sometimes it looks like walking away from money you desperately need because you know who you are. Sometimes it looks like loving someone when everyone tells you you're not enough. And sometimes, years later, you look back and realize that what the world dismissed as worthless was exactly what God intended to use.